Okay, we're going to pick up today with where we left off last week, which is with the third group of, or the third class, I should say, of the phylum Mollusca. And if you'll remember, open your books to page 619. So flip open to 619, because if you don't have your book out, get your book out, get on page 619, because all of this makes more sense if you can give it some place. Remember, 619 is going to be this page that has this graphic on it that shows how all these things fit together. And we actually, if you remember, we did these out of order. And we did annelids first because we were going to be dissecting the earthworm, and I wanted you to have that opportunity to have the background on it before we did it on our long day. So anyway, that's why we went in that route. But now we're on to mollusks, and the previous two groups of mollusks were gastropods. You may know what gastropods means. What's the literal interpretation of gastropods? Go ahead, Lana. Stomach footed. That's right. Stomach footed, which meant that their body, the foot sticks out from below their body. Okay. So gastropods, and that included sea slugs and conchs and snails. And then cephalopods. What did cephalopod mean? Angel, do you remember what cephalopod meant? Go ahead, Sam. Head footed. Okay. So that's the octopus and squid and meant octopus, squid, and nautilus. And that meant their primary, the most obvious feature of them is their large head. And then it has tentacles or feet that extend from that. And now we're on to bivalves. And bivalves have a two-part shell, clams and oysters, things that do this, right? Okay. And scallops, they lack cephalization. In other words, they don't really have a head end. And they move forward by expanding the anterior foot with blood. So it ends up being kind of hydrostatic. They don't have bones to pull against. They do have this external shell, but they don't have bones. So they by shunting blood into this foot, they can move it forward and attach and pull forward. And we're going to watch this mollusk video. See what it does a pretty good job of explaining some of that. So here that goes. Let's see if I can get play here.
Kingdom Animalia, phylum Mollusca. The sixth phylum is Mollusca. The mollusks are diverse, successful, and the second largest group of animals. Mollusks are advanced than annelids in features, such as the presence of a
Now the narrator is saying here that mollusks are a little more advanced than annelids in some ways. However, if you look at the chart on 619, which one comes first, mollusks or annelids, Hunter? 619. Which one comes first, mollusks or annelids? If you're going left to right. Okay. And what's the feature that makes annelids actually more complex? You see what feature separates them? You see how it goes up and tees off? Segmentation is right, Hunter. So they're segmented, and when we counted segments, and that's one of the features that we looked at on the earthworm. So they are more complex in some ways, but in a major advancement, which is segmentation, annelids are more complex.
Distinct head and foot, well-developed gills for respiration. Mollusca are bilaterally symmetrical, soft-bodied, unsegmented animals. The body is distinguished into a head, foot.
Now you hear her say that they're bilaterally symmetrical, which many of them are, but then some of them aren't. We'll get to the bivalves, which are not.
Visceral mass and a mantle. The mantle secretes a shell, and the space between the mantle and the body wall is known as mantle cavity. Molluscs have gills or tenidia for respiration, which are located in the mantle cavity. The alimentary canal is
So if they breathe with gills, where do they have to live? Sam? They got to live in water. Gills only work in water.
well developed and coiled. Most molluscs have a rasping tongue-like radula used for feeding.
Sometimes they call it a scraping tongue, so it can wipe away stuff, algae and things like that. Some of the things that they might eat.
Molluscs show a lacunar type of circulatory system in which there is a dorsal heart and a few blood vessels. Excretion is done through one or two pairs of kidneys. Sexes are separate in molluscs, and the
So the sexes are separate, so we'd say they're not what, Landon? Having both is called what? Angel, do you remember that word? Having both genders is called, like what annelids were. Hunter, you remember that word? No. Hermaphroditic. So these are not hermaphroditic. Okay. I don't know if you've ever heard the term hermaphrodite, but that means having both genders. So these are single sexes. They're separate.
fertilization may be internal or external. The nervous system in molluscs comprises of paired cephalic, pleural, pedal, and visceral ganglia. Molluscs also show the presence of sensory organs such as eyes, tentacles, etc. Phylum Mollusca is divided into 6 classes.
So what's another name for the group that bivalves are in? If you look at this graphic, what's another word for, we said there were 3 classes from your notes. What are the 3 classes of mollusks according to your notes? Sam? No, that's a feature of them. Yep.
I have cephalopods.
Cephalopods is one. That's up here. Cephalopoda, right? What else? Right. What's the third one that we had? So bivalves are called pelecypoda. Pelecypoda, I'm not for sure how it's correctly pronounced.
But the 3 major classes are Gastropoda, Pelecypoda, and Cephalopoda. Class Gastropoda includes terrestrial and aquatic mollusks, which are snails, slugs, and winkles. Their body is asymmetrical because of the twisting of the visceral mass in the spiral shape of the shell.
Okay, so they're asymmetrical. You can't cut it in any one way and make it in equal halves or even radially because they've got this irregular, twisted visceral mass.
The second class, called Pelecypoda, includes bivalves such as mussels, clams, and oysters. They are typically burrowers in mud and sand and show bilateral symmetry. The third class is that of Cephalopoda, which includes octopus and squid. They are
Cephalopoda's head
adapted for
foot.
swimming and are active animals with well-developed sense organs and nervous system.
So, yeah, they're calling it the 6th phylum, but as Hunter pointed out, in our sequence here, it's actually the 5th phylum rather, excuse me, and because annelids are actually a little more complex with symmetry. Gills for respiration. Okay. Stop that just a second. All right, so we're back, and we're going to go on to the next group then. And what is the next group? Angel, what will be the next group? The next one we haven't talked about? No, you're skipping one in there, I think. Arthropoda. Okay, arthropods. And mollusks are the second most common phylum of animals. Arthropods are the largest phylum. Okay, largest phyla in terms of diversity. 1 million species identified, and they estimate there could be 30 million species potentially. Now, you might think, well, that seems a little bit extreme, and perhaps it is, but I think probably what you have to say is if you look at the parts of the world that have been thoroughly investigated, and there have been a million, of these identified, and you extrapolate that out to the parts of the world that maybe haven't been looked at in that kind of detail, that's probably where that estimate is coming from. Okay, we're gonna take a couple slides of notes, and then we'll come back to that video. It is a good overview video, but we'll break it up a little bit with that. So, characteristics. According to page 619, what's the advancement that makes arthropods unique from annelids? What's the next T in the branching? What do you have there, Hunter? They have jointed appendages. And what are jointed appendages going to allow for? Well, let's turn it around. What kind of organisms don't have jointed appendages for the most part? Organisms that live in water, right? If they live in water, what mostly supports the weight of something that lives in water, Landon? The water does. Do you remember what that force is from ninth grade, maybe? Buoyancy. That's exactly right. That's something, isn't it? If I do say so. Buoyancy. But when you move on to land, you got to support your own weight. And that's done with jointed appendages. So they have jointed appendages that are adapted for walking, swimming, reproducing, eating, sensory reception. And modifications of those limbs or appendages accounts for most of the diversity. You can look at ones that are able to walk, ones that are able to swim, etc. And there are, in this case, we're going to find out that arthropods are actually divided into subphyla rather than the other ones we've talked about are mostly classes, but these are subphyla. And you might flip ahead in your book when you get an opportunity now to page 635, which shows arthropod diversity. Shows a number of different things there. And it on the next page, it actually talks about some of the subphyla. Okay. It talks about fused segments. So the closest thing we could say to a fused segment is if you looked at the earthworm, which part of its body looked like it was it didn't have quite as defined of segments? But I remember on the earthworm, what part of an earthworm's body didn't have quite as defined of segments? What was that smooth, light-colored part? Anybody remember? Angel, do you remember what that was? On the earthworm, that smooth, kind of lighter part. Clitellum? Okay, it was a clitellum. It was the smooth, kind of whitish part. The rest of it had obvious appendages. The only reason obvious segmentation. The only reason I point that out is as we move forward here, now we have those segments like in annelids, and which included oligochaetes like earthworms and arudinians like leeches. You could see the individual kind of ribs of the segments. But then it allows for kind of compartmentalization, which is what we have. We have a cranial cavity, and we have a thoracic cavity, and we have an abdominal cavity. Now, that's not including our limbs, but what you need to understand is that's basically how most of the animals going forward are organized. They have a head cavity or cephala part, and then a thoracic cavity, which is the chest, what's enclosed in our rib cage, and then an abdomen. And that's actually what arthropods have. They have an exoskeleton of chitin, which is a strong and flexible substance. It allows a place for muscles to attach. So unlike us, our muscles attach to our bones that are inside of us. Their muscles attach to their exoskeleton, which is outside of them. But because their skeleton is on the outside, what has to happen? What's it say there, Hunter? What do they have to do because their skeleton's on the outside? They molt, which means what? You've probably seen that, haven't you, with different insects or animals? You'll see a shell of it. What do you say? That thing did what? Right. They shed the old one, right? We say it shedded its skeleton or it shedded its shell or whatever, and then it moves out and gets a bigger one. Because our bones are inside us and our bones are living, and so they grow with us. But in something like an arthropod, it's on the outside and it's not truly living. They're just attached to it. So they lose it and grow a new one. Segments are fused again. Okay, subphyla. The first one is Chelicerata. The first is the subphylum Chelicerata, and that includes, sorry, I didn't mean to goof that up. Trying to get you centered up here. Okay, so they're divided into subphyla, the first of which is Chelicerata, and while you're working there, I'm going to read that to you. So the arachnids are included in subphylum Chelicerata, and they include terrestrial spiders, which means spiders on land, scorpions, ticks, and mites. And in that group, it has 6 pairs of appendages, the chelicera and the pedipalps, and 4 pairs of walking legs. That's why you always hear arachnids or spiders have how many legs? Landon? 8 legs, that's right. But so they have 6 pairs of appendages, which would be 12 total appendages, but 1 pair of them are the chelicera, and 1 pair are what are called the pedipalps, and then the other 4 pairs are legs, which would make 8 legs. So again, the Chelicerata includes arachnids or spiders. Okay. Examples, again, I already read those to you, but spiders, scorpions, ticks, and mites. And as far as the way that they live, read you that passage. Ticks and mites are parasitic. Ticks suck blood out of vertebrates and sometimes transmit diseases, some of them even pretty severe, like Rocky Mountain spotted fever, or maybe you've heard of Lyme disease. Chiggers, which are the larvae of certain mites, feed on the skin of vertebrates. Anybody ever had chiggers? Quite uncomfortable. If you've been around any kind of little sand pit, gravel pit type ponds in the tall grass, yeah, they get wherever your clothes are tight and your waistband and your sock bands and all that. and makes you want to claw your skin off. They're not very pleasant. Yeah. Anyway, so that's what they are. Spiders are the most familiar arachnids. Have a narrow part that separates the cephalothorax. So it said 3 body parts: head, thorax, and abdomen. But in many of them, the cephalothorax, which means the head and chest, so to speak, are together. And then they have that kind of a bulb body. Spiders have venomous glands in the chelicera. They produce silk threads, and they have what are called book lungs. And the reason they're called book lungs, I'll show you that picture. This picture right here in your book, which is on page 639. It's got a bunch of layers, like pages of a book, and that's the kind of the origin of that name. It says the inner body wall form lamella of spiders, so-called book lungs. Air flowing into the folded lamella on one side exchanges gas with blood flowing on the opposite side, in the opposite direction on the other side. So they would be the equivalent then of lungs, but they're better suited for gas exchange on land without the benefit of dissolution in water. Okay, the next group are the crustaceans, which are subphylum Crustacea, and they're named for their hard shells, and they have a calcified exoskeleton. Those include barnacles and shrimp and lobsters. I think if you think of crustacean, I think all of us kind of think of things that are in water or marine, but that's not entirely true. It does include sow bugs and pill bugs. What's the more common name for a pill bug? Pretty sure you know this. When you try to mess with them, they curl up in a ball. What are they, Landon? Roly-polies. Okay, roly-polies. So while you're writing that, I'll read you a little bit of this passage about crustaceans. Large group of mainly marine arthropods that include the things we just said. There are also some freshwater crustaceans, including crayfish, and then some terrestrial ones, which I just said, sow bug and pill bug. So their circulatory system includes a hemocoel, which is a reduced coelom or body cavity that surrounds the organs. So basically what you have there is you have this kind of a fluid. Maybe blood isn't quite the right term for it, because it's not exactly like our blood, but this body fluid that would be the equivalent of blood that kind of bathes the organs inside them. And there is some circulation there. If you look on page 636 at the anatomy of a crayfish. Carries a respiratory pigment called hemocyanin. And hemo, like our blood, has hemoglobin, which is what carries the oxygen for us. But it says it actually does, I misspoke there. It is contained, a heart within a pericardial cavity pumps blood containing the respiratory pigment hemocyanin into the hemocoel, using or consisting of sinuses that are open spaces. So it's kind of partially enclosed and partially not, where the hemolymph flows about the organs. Our hemoglobin is red, iron-containing pigment. Hemocyanin is blue and is copper-based rather than iron-based. So overall, it is actually an open circulatory system because blood isn't contained within vessels all the time. Okay, the last, well, we've got a little time here. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking specifically about one of these. All you have to write from that screen is crayfish anatomy. Okay, then the external crayfish anatomy, and you should be looking on page 636 for this. They have some segments that are fused. First of all, they have a head and chest, that is a cephalothorax, and then appendages that are specialized. So you have what are called antennules, which are for balance and touch and taste, and then antennae that are for the purpose of touch and taste also, and then the mouth parts. Mandible for chewing, the maxilla for holding food and passing it along, and then maxillipeds. And there'll be some of this that you'll be responsible for. This isn't going to be a major focus of what I want you to know. But I do think it's important that you recognize that the appendages have kind of specific form and function both. So if you look at those different things that are shown on page 636, you can see all of those features, each of which has its own kind of function, and there's a little bit of difference. There's a difference in the length and the diameter and so on of those different appendages. Yeah, 3 more slides, and then we'll watch that. Then we'll watch that video. And again, just to give context to this, we're talking about a crayfish here specifically, but we're talking about an example of the group that are crustaceans, subphylum Crustacea. Oops, I misspoke. There are 4. I shorten them a little bit. So this is an extension. They have walking legs, swimmerets, and uropods. The uropods are kind of the flaps on the tail. So if you look at the diagram here, that's the uropods for swimming. And you've probably seen that on other shellfish type crustaceans. And then they have light detecting eyes. Okay, that's all the external stuff. And then internally, you'll recognize some of these features are going to be like an annelid. They have an open circulatory system. What does that mean, Angel? If the circulatory system is open? Well, I'll tell you this, our circulatory system is closed. So think of closed being like enclosed. Where is our blood in our body? in veins and arteries, right? In vessels. So an open circulatory system, we'd say the blood is, right? It's on the inside of the body, but it's not enclosed in vessels. So the problem with that is that it's not as efficient. I mean, if we need more, if we need more oxygen and nutrients to get to our legs because we're running, our body can channel the blood to our legs through vessels. In the case of something that has an open circulatory system, there's nothing to really direct the blood in a particular way. So it's not nearly as efficient. The excretory system has green glands that filter blood. What would green glands of a crayfish be like in us? Look what it says it does. It filters blood. What are the blood filtering organs in us, Landon?
Green glands.
That's what crayfish have. How about in us? Look, right back here. Anybody know what organs are in the lower part of your back? Well, that's attached to it. They filter out fluid and send it to your bladder through what are called ureters. But what are the organs that do the blood filtering? If they don't work, you have to go in for dialysis to have it artificially filtered. Kidneys? That's what your kidneys do. So the green glands of a crayfish would be kind of akin to the kidneys of us. They have a brain and ventral nerve cord. Arachnids had a ventral nerve cord, right? We rolled that thing out of the way so we could see. It, that light-colored strand. And then they have a grinding stomach. What would we say that is? What might be another word we could use to describe a grinding stomach? Sam, is the hard part in the digestive tract of the worms. You poked it and it was kind of rubbery and hard. And Hunter said he likes to eat them. Well, Hunter says now he doesn't like to eat them. What's that organ? Gizzard. So that grinding organ would be like a gizzard. And then intestine, and then there are digestive glands that absorb food. Hang in here with me, guys. We're getting it narrowed down. Now, Uniramia includes the class insects, and that's a huge group of organisms. And in fact, it has its own area of biology called entomology. Like out here at the State Farm. Does everybody know where the State Farm is out there? Oddly enough, on State Farm Road. So there's actually an entomologist that works out there, and entomologists work with farmers and other people in agriculture. And the idea there is to control insects, ones that are damaging to crops and things like that. But entomology is the study of insects. They have complicated behavioral adaptations, social systems, and colonies. Who can think of something that has colonies? That we'd say there's a colony of Landon? Bees, absolutely, bees. And what else? Ants, that's right. Bees and ants, those are exactly the two that I thought of. Now, that doesn't mean that other insects don't have large groups or colonies, but you're probably also aware, maybe you've seen shows or read something about the way that bees behave and the way that ants behave. They're interdependent. And that's something that's an advancement, a social advancement. And social means the interaction of organisms within a population. Just like you guys are familiar with the term social media. Social media means it's the way that members of a population, people, communicate. It's one of the ways that we communicate or interact. So those social systems, in their case, it has to do with survival. It increases their opportunity to survive by them helping one another get food and to protect and all those kinds of things, and make shelter, a hive or an anthill or whatever it might be. The body segments here are fused into head, thorax, and abdomen. They have 3 pairs of legs. So while we said arachnids have how many legs? Arachnids, 8. Here we say insects have 6, right? Insects would have 6, 3 pairs. And they have a lighter exoskeleton because it has less chitin. And we can think of that. If we think of a crustacean, we think of it having a big, thick, heavy exoskeleton. But insects, some of them don't really have much of an exoskeleton at all. But if you think of like beetles and things like that, they have a skeleton, but it might be a little bit lighter. Okay, I assure you, this next screen is the last one. So this is talking now about some specific things that insects have, which again are part of the subphylum Uniramia, and they have Malpighian tubules that collect concentrated waste so they conserve water. Why would it be important for insects to have these Malpighian tubules for saving water, whereas crustaceans didn't really have anything like that? What are most insects doing that's different from most crustaceans? Sam, what do you think? What are insects doing that's different from crustaceans that requires them to conserve water? Well, let's look at some examples of each. Crustaceans included shrimp and lobster and crabs, and insects include bees and ants and termites. What would be a difference between bees and ants and termites versus lobster and shrimp and things like that? Where do they live? And crustaceans live in water, so they don't need to worry about conserving water too much. They're in water. On the other hand, insects have to conserve water, concentrates their waste. And again, in this case, that would be a little bit like what our kidneys do also. Our kidneys help us achieve water balance. If we drink a lot of water, we're going to urinate more because we don't have to conserve it. On the other hand, if you don't drink enough water, you're not going to urinate much because your kidneys recognize that you need that fluid in your blood, so they don't remove very much water from your blood. The respiratory system includes tubes called tracheae that extend from openings called spiracles. Probably should highlight the term spiracles, little openings on their body, and you can see those on page 638 in the picture of the grasshopper. They have little tiny holes in their right, actually in kind of their exoskeleton. And then their life cycle features gradual or complete metamorphosis. So if we use a butterfly as an example, does anybody know the 4 stages of a butterfly in metamorphosis? Well, they start out as an egg. So it goes egg. Anybody know the 4? Yeah. Egg, larva, pupa, adult. Okay? Egg, larva, pupa, adult. Okay, we're going to go back to do you have that, guys? You still working, Angel? Okay. Go back to the video and watch that. Okay, guys, for your assignment, you need to, for your assignment, you need to do, let me show you this. Angel, maybe you can get that from Sam quickly. Okay, so on Quizlet, guys, you need to look at this. On Quizlet, you go to Woolmalley and then go to classes and then biology, and there's a new set. You can go and speak to these guys if you need to, Father. Okay, so here's you're going to take this tomorrow. Now, I would also recommend that you go ahead and answer the questions on on arthropods. But here's the thing you need to do. You're going to have this Quizlet quiz tomorrow. Okay. Now there are pictures on here. They all have, if you look, they all have pictures and there's arrows on them and so on. Okay. So that's what you have to do. And I guess we'll have to watch the video together when everybody's back. Okay. So that's what's going on. And if you guys would let the kids that